Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As we approach midlife, many of us are trying to find new pathways and new things to do that will guide us into the areas of our lives that we would like to see fulfilled. Sometimes we find ourselves stumbling across blocks not knowing where they came from or sometimes what they are in general. So today on the Beyond 50 radio program we thought we would take a different route and do what is known as inner freedom therapy, which is developed by our next guest joining us here on the program today. She's joining us from the United Kingdom, and she uses this process, and she's going to share the experience in working with clients and guiding them to experience their past lives, future lives, and lives between lives. She'll offer suggestions on how to clean and clear away blocks to success, discover your life purpose, reach and fulfill potential, and create a fabulous future. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today, Lorraine Flaherty. Lorraine, how are you today?
I'm very good indeed. Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, tell us about this type of freedom, past lives, future lives. What's that all about?
Yes, I've been developing this process over the course of many years because I started working as a clinical hypnotherapist, and I realized that there were so many layers to people's problems and issues. And the wonderful thing that I discovered was that the answers were inevitably inside. Somewhere at the subconscious level, there was a part of them that knew how to resolve the issues that they were having. And I found that if I was able to target specific areas, so taking them back to issues from current life, that would often resolve and help people to make positive changes. But it didn't always work completely. So I found that I had to often dig a little bit deeper, and that meant going even further back, looking at ancestral patterns and things that may well have been carried through in the DNA, through the family lines. And often I had to go back even further into other lives that had been lived, because often there would be unresolved issues or karmic events that occurred in those lives that were still having an impact on the person and who they are now.
Mm-hmm. So, past lives, is there proof that really exists, that we come in from a past life into this one with something that maybe is unresolved?
Well, this is a great question, and it's one that I get asked a lot. And the field of psychology will often say that the past life experiences that people have is just a metaphor that the mind is making up to help them to see their problem from a different perspective. And at the beginning, I used to be quite open to that idea, thinking that that might be the case. However, after 13 years of working with people and the extraordinary stories that they bring forward, I'm now convinced. Mainly because the clients will bring back information, data, names, dates, information that is not about people that are famous. You know, there's a lot of stories about people that claim to be Napoleon or Cleopatra or someone famous, but I've never had that. These people are quite obscure. But it could be that it was, as in one case that I worked with, a guy who he was a British personal trainer, but he found himself in a past life as an American soldier. Mm-hmm. And he gave me names, details, and this particular soldier had found himself in Germany at the end of the Second World War, and he described in great detail the events that occurred as he parachuted in. He told me the names of his colleagues and friends, and he was speaking in real army language. And what happened was that when I brought him back out of the session and we went on the internet and had a look, it turned out that not only did this guy exist, but he'd actually been awarded a posthumous Medal of Bravery. He'd actually died in that incident in Germany, and he'd been awarded a medal. And I actually found a photograph of the guy's gravestone on the internet. And there are many cases, and I've documented quite a few of these in the book that I've written about evidence. But also, I mean, there was a professor in the University of Virginia called Dr. Ian Stevenson, who for the period of about 20 years was studying the spontaneous recall of children who talked about their past lives, and they just remembered them spontaneously. And there were about 2,500 cases that he was able to prove without any shadow of a doubt that these children were bringing forth information that they couldn't possibly have known about, and the only explanation really was that they had lived before.
Mm-hmm. So now, how do you use the information that you get through someone who has a past life to be able to kind of guide them in this one.
Absolutely. One of the key things when I do this work, it's always therapeutic. I don't work in the light of, oh, have I had a past life? That's not how it works. So people will come to see me because there's a challenge or an issue that they're facing in their life. It may be a lack of confidence, or it may be an issue with relationships. It may be that they're repeating the same patterns over and over again with whether people or situations. So they have an intention, they have an idea of something they want to explore, and what we do is we go back and we look to find the source of it. We look to go and find the past life where this problem began, where it originated. And in many of the cases, particularly those who are having challenges with relationships, it may be that they go back to a past life where they felt as though somebody that they loved very dearly betrayed them. Mm-hmm. And that may or may not have been true in the past life, because we know sometimes our perceptions of things aren't always what they seem. And when they go back and they find the truth of the story and they start to understand why they faced those challenges and why they experienced what they did, that understanding enables them to release the blockage. So I had one particular client where the same thing happened. She was struggling to get married. She really wanted to get married, but she wasn't meeting anybody. And in her past life, she felt that the person that she had been in love with had run out on her when difficult times had happened. So she made a vow in that life that she wouldn't risk it, that she wouldn't fall in love with anybody again because it was too painful. And in the past life, she saw that actually it had been tragic circumstances that meant that this person let her down. It hadn't had anything to do with him not loving her. And this vow that she had made, that she wouldn't love anybody again, she realised that she didn't have to hold on to that anymore, and that this wasn't something that was necessary. And the outcome's quite extraordinary, because once the session was over and she'd given herself permission to fall in love, some really strange synchronicitous experiences happened where people turned up and insisted that they introduce her to somebody. And within a very short period of time, she fell in love with this person that they wanted her to meet. And within a year, they were married. And they knew categorically they were meant to be together. But the strangest bit about the story is that he had been her brother's very, very close friend all the way through growing up. And he had actually been an usher at the wedding at which she'd been a bridesmaid. And they hadn't seen each other.
Wow.
And they went back and looked at the wedding video afterwards, her brother's wedding, and they saw that they were within 15 to 20 feet of one another for most of the night. And when I tell you that this girl is extraordinarily beautiful, it's almost impossible that this guy hadn't seen her. But for me, I believe that there was a blockage. There was an absolute block for both of them because they couldn't fall in love because she had made this agreement. But once she cleared it away, the doorway opened, and she's now, very happily married and looking forward to a wonderful life with him.
It's really strange. I would think that when you tell people or they read your book, about what you've done and how you've worked with people, that they kind of leave themselves scratching their heads, but you got to imagine there's something inside of them that says, but what if it is true?
Absolutely. And, one of the reasons why I wrote the book was because so many of these stories that emerged have there's a theme that runs through most of the stories anyway. It's about our search for meaning. It's about our search for self-love, if you like. It's about a search for growth. Who are we? Why are we here? And that for me is always about bettering ourselves in some way and about passing tests and getting things right so we can move on to other levels. And just like any good story, whether we're throughout the centuries, we've had fairy tales, we've had stories, we've had movies that people learn from. We see other people having experiences, and it helps us to learn something. I wrote this book because those experiences that my clients had, when I shared those stories with other people, it resonated with them. And often they could see where they were stuck. They could see patterns in their own lives, and they could see how perhaps there may be something that they had agreed to do or not do when they were here in this life. And that curiosity starts to open up questions in the mind. So when people ask questions about why did I choose this, why would I have chosen this? It brings personal responsibility back to each individual. And that empowers people. So rather than feeling like a victim and feeling like they are at the mercy of circumstances and pointing fingers of blame out to other people and saying, oh, you hurt me and you did this to me, people are saying, oh, hang on a minute. Why did I choose to experience that? What am I supposed to learn here? And that's what I believe inner freedom is all about. Mm-hmm. When we realise that actually we are in control and that we have a choice in the situations in our lives.
Mm-hmm. So it's pretty amazing to consider the fact that people tend to create their own pain or their own agony or their own, I guess, negative experiences, but it's easy for them to say, well, it was these circumstances that caused this, when in fact they were kind of bringing that to the table in the first place. Is that kind of a good way to look at it?
It is, and I know that people struggle with this one a little bit because they say, well, why would I choose that? Why would I choose to experience pain or suffering?
That's the rational side. The subliminal side says, hey, do you really want us to go that direction, or do you want to have a talk with me for a minute?
Absolutely. And I did a workshop recently, and a guy came up to me at the end, and particularly because I was talking about the life between lives space, the interlife, where we go at the end of the session to get these answers. We go back to meet with soul group members, and we go back to that place that I call home, the space in the light, which is total unconditional love, and it's really wonderful. And he just looked at me and he said, why would we bother? If that place up there is so I say up there using a very loose term, but if the spirit realms are so fantastic, why would we choose to come here and do all this hard work and suffering and the grief and just the struggle? And I said to him, any time we experience joy and bliss and wonderful things, it's great, and we really enjoy it. But if we stayed in that space all the time, no matter how beautiful and blissful it was, eventually we'd get bored. Eventually we would want to move on and do something else, and we have to have contrast. And also, here on the earth plane, it's the space where we get to grow. It's where we get to evolve. It's where we get to expand who we are and what we're accomplishing. And we don't accomplish that much. We don't learn that much from the good stuff. It's the adversity, it's the challenge that makes us stronger and really helps us to grow. So my belief is that we have to do it all. I absolutely categorically believe that as a soul, we have to experience the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows so that we have complete balance. So you can be absolutely sure that even though one life might be about suffering and it might be about difficulty, somewhere on the other end of the spectrum, there will have been a life that was joyous and blissful and full of wonderful things. And I think a perfect life really is one that is a balance of both of those, where you get to experience all of them. And I think that's what this work is all about, because once people start to clear the heavier stuff and the sort of, the slightly more difficult and challenging experiences, and they start to clear away the clutter, the mental clutter, which is what I think this work is all about, it leaves a space for good stuff to come in.
And you think, and this is quite incredible to actually reflect on, but the idea that people do suffer, and when they find themselves in bliss, or just maybe getting back to what you could call a regular day-to-day existence, that you remember the suffering, but you truly emotionally don't remember the real pain you were feeling in that suffering. But what's interesting is, when it comes to the blissful or the happy side, or whatever you want to call it, and you go and you remember that, you seem to remember how that really felt. And I have always found that to be an interesting paradox.
Absolutely, but again, I think that we were designed quite cleverly because if there is a kind of amnesia process that occurs in the brain when we have pain, particularly, I think about childbirth particularly, because and I teach clinical hypnosis to doctors and to midwives all over the country, and I know for a fact that the majority of women that give birth do end up with complete amnesia for the pain that they experienced giving birth. Otherwise, nobody would have another child.
Right.
So, it's an inbuilt mechanism to protect us. And often what happens in those experiences, and to be honest, it's partly what I teach, is that in those experiences of pain, what the protective part of us does is it usually floats us up and out of the experience. So we go into almost a trance state so that we're not actually associated with the body. And that's why we don't often remember it quite so clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But post-traumatic stress and you know, a lot of those things, when somebody has had a trauma in their life, sometimes people do actually remember the suffering, not in the same way, but, you know, negative thoughts creep in, and sometimes people do find themselves reliving over and over again bad things that happen to them. And sometimes in that mental process, it becomes worse each time they remember it because they're adding on more and more layers. And a lot of the work that I do in this inner freedom process is to help people to identify what are the memories that they have been holding on to that no longer serve them. So if there's been trauma in childhood or, you know, situation, again, I work in the corporate field sometimes for presentation skills and communication skills. Mm-hmm. And the amount of people, you know, I think they say there's 41% of the population, certainly in the UK, who have a fear of presentations, who have a phobia of actually standing up in front of a group. And in my experience, most of those people have that phobia because when they were at school, there was a moment when they were very small where they were forced to get up in front of the class and do something. And it traumatized them. And if the children laughed or if the teacher said something bad to them, they hold on to that experience and it creates a file within the memory bank. And the protective part of them will then go out of its way to make sure that they don't run that negative experience again. So any time they are given an opportunity to go and speak in front of a group, that part suddenly starts screaming, no, don't, it's going to be dangerous, it'll be bad, last time you did this, it was really painful. And it activates the fight-flight response in a person. So all they want to do is run away and escape. So part of the work that I do is helping them to identify those unhelpful memories. And then you can't get rid of them because that's not possible because these events existed, but we can change the perception of those memories. So often I'll go in and I'll have them go back, and they either go back as a grown-up and imagine supporting the younger them through the event and experience so they feel stronger, or we go back and we make it comical. You know, we go back and we make the whole thing quite funny, and we make it so that they imprint over that memory a version of them standing up and really enjoying the process. So that from that point onwards, when they think about stepping into that role again, instead of going back and looking at that terrifying memory, you know, suddenly the default setting is to go back and think, oh, that was fun. I can enjoy that. So there's many things that we can do to help people.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, Lorraine, what is something that's real common with people when they come and they want to try to change something about themselves? What is the most common thing that people come to you for?
The most common thing is probably relationships.
Okay.
It's probably relationships. And again, there'll be a theme. You know, there's either a lack of confidence, there is a lack of belief in themselves. But ultimately, the most thing, and no matter what it is, whether it's confidence or relationships or everything, it's usually because people don't value themselves enough. Somewhere at some level, they don't believe in themselves, they don't have trust in themselves, and what that does is it creates a mirror on the outside world. So if there's lack of trust or lack of self-worth, they call people in to have relationships with who also won't value them, who won't trust them or won't behave in a trustful manner. So when people come in and they start complaining about the relationships that they've had in their lives, and again, this is an exercise I get people to do in the book, is to start looking at what were the patterns and the themes, because what I see is that the person that they call in or the type of person that they call in is going to be mirroring something in them that needs to be healed. Mm-hmm. You know, people come together because they have matching wounds, and it's such a gift because when you start to identify or recognize what you don't like or what you see needs to be healed in the other, you know, we see their failings or their bad behaviors, and we start to understand what might lie behind that. It shows people what they need to heal in themselves. Mm-hmm. And then when they start to love themselves and when they start to feel whole and when they start to accept themselves, warts and all, and recognize that who they are is enough and that they are, you know, they're unique. They stop comparing themselves to others. In that wholeness, then they can start to call in relationships with people who are also whole, who also are able to love themselves. And that creates a much, much healthier planet. And a much healthier environment for everybody.
You know, I was thinking it was probably about more than 10 years ago, I remember doing an interview with an author on a book about relationships and building and having good relationships, or the relationships that you want with other people, loving relationships. And it was interesting because she brought up something that I'd never thought of before, at least at that time, and that is, it's interesting when you watch shows, for instance, here in America, we have The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. And,
we have similar shows here.
Yeah, okay, great. So, here you get this one person that gets to choose out of 24 people which one they think they're going to be in love with, which it blows my mind that we buy into this nonsense, but we do,
Yeah.
And what's fascinating, though, is so you write down all this criteria that you believe you really want from someone else. And what was interesting is that she juxtaposed that whole idea in saying, when that person comes along that you desire, are you going to be what they want? And I thought, I never thought about it that way before. We want the crown, the cake, and we want to eat it too, but the fact is we're going to have the right silverware when it comes along, and it was just an interesting way to look at it. So
Absolutely. So, I mean, my take on that is, who is it that you want to be in relationships? What kind of a person do you want to be?
Uh-huh.
If you're thinking about the qualities you want the other person to have, do you have those qualities? We turn it back on self. Do you love yourself and honor yourself in the way that you would like somebody else to?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, why not? I do it. There's a whole chapter about thoughts and how our thoughts affect our reality, and these thoughts that come from these inner beliefs that need to be cleared. But so much of the work that I do is based on the really, really negative self-talk that people inflict on themselves. And I do an exercise where I get people to identify how they berate themselves, when they're telling themselves off because they feel like a failure or if they made a mistake. And I make them to really identify what those negative thoughts are, the name callings. And, everybody has that. They have a way of talking to themselves when they're not in a good space. But what I do is I have them imagine talking to somebody else like that. And I tell you, and I do this in the corporate field as well, especially when I'm doing communication and influencing skills. And I say, let's imagine that you have somebody that you're supposed to be supporting, somebody that you're supposed to be encouraging. They've got an important task that they've got coming up. But the only thing you're allowed to say to them is the things that you say to yourself when you're giving yourself a hard time. And 9 times out of 10, and this goes for grown men too, because I have them do this for quite a long time. I have them imagine that it's days and weeks and months that they're talking to this person, and they're in tears. And afterwards they say to me, but that's outrageous. I would never speak to somebody else like that.
Right.
And then I say nothing. And then you can almost hear a pin drop in the room, because then they're all looking at each other as the thought hits them, this is what I've been doing to myself. And when I have them describe how that person feels, they're like, well, they would feel devastated and they would feel destroyed and they would feel absolutely wasted. They would feel like a piece of rubbish. And I say, well, then why would you do that to yourself? And particularly in those moments when, and the people with the phobias, the ones that don't want to get up and do the presentation, those were the ones that were doing it the worst, because they were saying to themselves, you're an idiot, you're going to fail, you might not get it right, they're all going to laugh at you. How helpful is that? So part of the process is getting people to become really, really aware of how they communicate, and not just outwardly, not just with other people. That's important too, but it starts with self. And I always say, when you heal yourself, it's like a ripple in a pond effect. When people take care of themselves, they take ownership of who they are, they start to become aware of their thinking, they start to be more compassionate and loving towards themselves. It gives permission for other people to do it back to them. And, of course, it then means, again, ripple in a pond, because the more they start to generate good feeling with the people that are close to them, those people then go out and start behaving nicer to the people around them and those around them, and it goes on and on and on. So that healing of self really does start to heal the world.
I just had a thought of a guest, and you might know Byron Katie.
Yes, I know of her work. Yes, amazing.
I think what is amazing is she has one question that I found that really helps quite a bit, especially when somebody might present something in a negative way, or you might, to yourself, do the very same thing as you were talking about, people with the negative self-talk. And the question is, what evidence do you have that that's true?
Yeah.
Boy, wrap your mind around something like that and try to have something make sense when you rationalize the reality that it's ridiculous what you're thinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, of course, the thing that I know is that for the majority of people, those negative thoughts are on a default setting. You know, Bruce Lipton, who talks about epigenetics, talks about the fact that, you know, in childhood, children are operating at a different brainwave function. They're actually operating at an alpha brainwave function when, you know, in our normal state we're in beta brainwaves. And in the alpha state, that's where we take people in hypnosis, because they are more open to suggestions. They absorb things like a sponge. It's why children learn languages really easy when they're small. But not only are they able to learn languages, but they absorb everything that's said to them. So it only takes one moment of a parent saying, "Oh, for God's sake, you idiot, look what you've done," when they spill the milk or they drop something over. And these children are soaking that up, and what they do is that they register those statements as a file in the back of the memory bank. And they then have a perception that that is the appropriate way to speak to somebody when they make a mistake. And it becomes part of the programming. It becomes part of who they are. And they carry that with them into every experience. And then what happens is that they start looking for evidence, because the more they hear that, you know, if a child hears it once or twice in their life, but they get loads of reinforcement that, you know, they are amazing and they're loved and you know, all is good, that's probably, you know, it's a drop in an ocean. But if it's consistent, if they're hearing that all the time, if it's all around them, you know, if they're getting it from all sides, that file gets bigger and stronger and more powerful. And they will then look for evidence in the outside world that that's true. So they will start focusing on all the situations and events in their lives where they made a mistake. They won't look at what they got right. They will look for, "See, told you were an idiot. See, that person was right. I knew you were an idiot. Look, you just got that wrong." And many people are programmed to do that for their whole lives. You know, they just keep looking for the stuff that's wrong. And then they keep finding it in themselves, in other people, in their jobs, in their home. And I see this a lot where people, they don't even realise how conditioned they are, versus somebody who's been programmed to think that life is great and it's wonderful and they can do anything. You know, these are the you know, the success stories of the world, the people that even if they fall down, get back up again because they think, hell, I can do this. You know, I'm good enough. I'm worthy. So part of what my work does is about getting people, once we've identified and we bring those things to the surface, we then go in the deep meditation state, in the relaxation state, and we go to the point where those files started, and we go and we identify, and then we change them. And we go back to those moments when they were a small child. We go back to the first moment they heard those bad things, and we alter it. You know, we get the grown-up version of them to go back and tell their inner child that they are beautiful and special, and that they are worthy of all good things, and that they are worthy of love. And we change the program. We change the file that has been, like I said, the default programming that's been running behind the scenes. And I've seen such powerful shifts in people's lives as a result of doing that, and getting them to create new affirmations, new thoughts that they keep focusing on. You know, I have people print out stuff and they put it on their mirrors and they put it in their wallet and they put it in the car, so that every time they look at it, they tell you, you know what, I am good enough. I am special. You know, I am worthy. And it's through repetition then as well. You know, we change it on the unconscious level, but through conscious awareness of those thoughts that they're having, they make changes there too.
It's quite amazing when you realize, and I know that you do, having done this work for quite a long time, the real energetic power of a word.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that we really underestimate just how powerful language is, and the words that we use, and the things that we are saying to ourselves on a daily basis, day-to-day basis. You know, I think there was some research that showed that the average person has between 50 and 150,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
Which is a lot. And for the average person, around 70% of those are going to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
And even scarier is that roughly around 90% of those thoughts are usually the ones that they had the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that, because they're default programming.
And now you can see why people overeat and come to you to trying to lose weight, right?
Absolutely. Because, again, they go into conscious willpower and they say, I'm going to do something different. And the minute they lose that focus, or they're thinking about something else, you know, they put the TV on, or, you know, so their mindset, they're not actually focused anymore. You know, they've zoned off into TV land, and then they run back into the default setting. They go into autopilot, and autopilot only runs from default setting. And if what you've always done is overeaten, when you're in autopilot, you're going to overeat, unless you go in consciously to the unconscious space and change the program. Unless you go in and change the default setting that says, actually, I'm just going to eat when I'm hungry and I'll just eat enough. And when I'm full up, I'll stop. You change the program to that, which is what I do when I work with people with weight control. Mm-hmm. And it changes everything.
Mm-hmm. What has been the most fascinating person that you worked with when they came to you and it just kind of surprised you what they were there for, and maybe it kind of, evolved into something else once they were there and you began to help do the work?
Well, do you know what? It's really hard to say because every single, and it sounds crazy, but every single client that I work with is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And no matter who comes in and sits down in front of me, once I start finding out people's life stories anyway, they are extraordinary. I do sometimes wonder how people are still walking around out there with the things that they've experienced in their lives. I look at this.
Just the fact that you're coming to see me is a strike against you right off.
And then when we take them into the past lives, I had a client today who had issues about isolation and battles with relationships and constant rejection. Rejection. And when I took him into the past life, and he went into a past life as a monk in a monastery and I think it was like 1135 or something. And they were part of the Knights of Malta. And in this life, he had found out through various different means, through connecting with various different people and finding various different writings, that actually that the whole thing, the ethos in the monastery, and he'd started to learn it by the way they were treating each other, which wasn't very kindly and wasn't very loving, that none of it was true, that it was all fake, it was all false. And so he started to realise that we were all divine beings and that our connection to God was, individual, and we didn't need religion. We didn't need these organised religions, and we didn't need to keep, giving away money and living in this fear and brimstone world. And he was in this real battle because his loyalty to the people that had taken him in and looked after him and trained him. So he confessed to the person that was in charge, to the head monk. And he told him that he had these doubts and that he had these thoughts. So the head monk got very angry and threatened to throw him out, and then realised that he couldn't let him out because he might say this to other people. So they captured him, they locked him up, and they tortured him.
Oh, no.
And they put nails through him, they ripped his fingernails out, They broke his ribs. I mean, it was...
Our show is not normally this graphic, folks, but, they're from England, so they say things like this.
Usually they're very gentle, but that's why this was such a surprise today. But, of course, people don't actually experience the pain when they're in it because they're recounting the story. But, but he was just very sad about all of this. Of course, it reinforced completely for him that at this time in history, what was being taught wasn't right, and that actually it should be all about unconditional love, and it should all be about, helping one another and supporting one another, which is why he'd gone into it in the first place. So we did a lot of healing, and we healed the body, and we healed all of that. But the funniest part about it was that when we took him into the sort of spirit realm part, when the life had come to an end, it turned out that the head monk, the abbot, the guy who'd been in charge, was one of his key soulmates. Oh. And in the spirit realm was one of his closest, dearest friends. And what he had chosen to work on in that life was injustice and isolation and torture. And it was a box that he needed to tick. So his his closest soulmate volunteered to be the one that would inflict that on him because he didn't want anybody else to do it. And it meant that he had experienced that, so he didn't need to experience that ever again, except that the idea of isolation and rejection had still, the essence of that had carried over into this life, which was why he was experiencing it now, not the torture, thankfully. Mm. So we cleared that. We got rid of it. And it meant that instead of being angry at the abbot and instead of being raging at what they'd done to him in that life, he was able to say thank you for it. He went into a space of gratitude. And it released. So he was able to forgive all the people that had been mean to him. So their souls got lighter, his soul got lighter. So huge forgiveness all round. When we understood that he was responsible, he picked it. He wanted to know what it was like to experience that. So it was all perfect.
Mm-hmm. So, that brings everything to a very interesting point. Now, for instance, as souls, we choose apparently the parents that we want to be part of. We sort of come through that. In your experience in working with people, do you see evidence that that's possible or that's true?
All the time. All the time, and particularly in the Life Between Lives work that I do, which is where we go into a past life, and then we go to the end of the life, and it's usually the lifetime that was just previous to the current life that you're in.
Right.
And when we float out of the life, it means we get to go to the space where we started to plan for the life that we were going to come into. And we get to check it out. And I know from my own experience, I mean, it was quite extraordinary when I did this for myself, because I found out that my challenge, my test in this life was to be a teacher, to spread the word about, the fact that we were incredibly powerful, unique, divine, spiritual beings, to open people's eyes to the truth of who they really were. And I'd been offered three different bodies and 3 different lives. I was offered a life in India as a very poor farmer, but who would be very in touch with the land, so quite spiritual. Or it was a lifetime in China where I would be in a family that were quite determined and driven and very ambitious, and I would have been involved with gymnastics and the piano. So it would have been through kind of physical and music that I would have been getting messages out there or sharing the word. Or it was to an Irish Catholic family who were going to be in London with all of the challenges and the things that was going to bring. And apparently I picked this one because the others were too easy.
Ah.
So I think that says quite a lot about my own soul. I know that in most of my past lives, when I've gone back and explored mine, I've usually chosen the difficult route.
Mm-hmm. Now,
but I think because I like the challenges.
Yeah, some people just want to find the hard way to get things done, I think.
They do. And of course, what I found out was that my parents had been with me. My parents are in this life, who, God love them. I feel so bad now for the challenges that I gave them. Never mind the challenges they gave me when I was younger, because I'm not in any way was I the easiest child, because I asked so many questions about everything. Who am I, and why am I here, and why was I born into this family? And are you sure you're my parents?
Mm-hmm.
You don't look like my parents. I'm sure my parents look like something else, because I was remembering past lives. But of course, what I found out was that they've been with me in many, many lifetimes. My mother has been with me through countless lifetimes as my mother, always coming in, trying to protect me and trying to stop me from doing things too fast or putting my neck on the line, or getting into trouble because I'm so vocal about things and won't toe the line, won't fit in and do what I'm told to do. So again, that was incredible, because when I met with them at that level, I realised that the challenges that I'd experienced in my childhood, because it was up and down, it was quite rocky as many people's childhoods are, I realised that it was all done on purpose to make me stronger, to make me grow. Mm-hmm. So all the sort of childhood angst that I'd had as a teenager, blaming my mum for not letting me, dress the way I wanted to dress or go party when I wanted to party, and the battles that we had with one another, I realised that it was all there for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I came back with the most incredible sense of gratitude. I really did. And I was able to ring my mother up and say, oh, my God, thank you for giving me such a challenge when I was growing up. Thank you for being so difficult in so many ways. And bless her, my mum's an Irish Catholic mother, so they do guilt really well. It's part of the and she said,
the
what
Jewish
you mean I'm
mother
not
guilt sort of a thing, right?
Yeah. So she said, well, what you mean I should stop feeling bad about not letting you wear the first Holy Communion dress you wanted to wear? And I said, yes, Mother, stop feeling bad. It was all perfect. It was all part of the divine plan. You were meant to make it difficult for me, as in the same way that I was meant to make it difficult for you. So I love you so much, and thank you, because the moments when I had to stand up to you and fight for my corner have led me to be able to do that now. And I have no fear now about speaking my truth or standing up to anybody. Mm-hmm. And for many people, they will find that the people in their lives that challenge them the most, that test them the most, those are usually their closest soul members, and the people that are closest to them. And again, people often say to me about soul groups and their soulmate, and there is a myth that your soulmate is going to be a romantic partner. But actually, I believe that we have many soulmates, and that these soulmates, who are the core soul group members, are the ones that will challenge us the most and make life the hardest for us. And that really can come as a bit of a shock to some people.
Mm-hmm. Especially those who force the issue that my soulmate is my romantic partner. It's like, really? You don't really seem to want too much out of life, do you? No.
Absolutely. And of course,
but,
it means...
I was going to touch on something since we're on that subject, Lorraine, about when you talk about soul groups. Is it true from your experience that we come into this life that souls tend to come together as they did in a past life?
Well, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do, but in my experience, they may come back together, but the form may be very different. So,
we tend to gravitate toward the kind of souls or relationships that we had in a past life, I guess would be a better way to phrase the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and particularly if there was an element of a relationship or an element of an experience that you didn't actually, if there was an unresolved issue or if there was some karmic business left undone, you're going to come back and repeat the same pattern again so that you can work through the lesson. So often people will find that they keep repeating the same pattern over and over again. And for me, that is always a clear indication that it's a past life issue. If the same problem keeps emerging and you keep running into the same brick wall, as it were, then that brick wall is trying to tell you something. Mm-hmm. So if people do find that they keep gravitating towards the same thing, it's usually because there's something that needs to be worked on or something that needs to be resolved.
Now, your book is Healing with Past Life Therapy. Now, tell our listeners how they can find that, and what is your website?
Yes, well, they can find the book. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble, or they can order it direct from my website. There are links on there that they can purchase it from, or Findhorn Press. Okay. My website is www.innerjourneys, which is INNERJOURY NEYS journeys.co.uk.
Oh, very good. And, finally I was going to ask, as people decide to maybe get a copy of this book, being here in the United States, are they able to explore and heal their past lives on their own? That's what this book was written for, right?
Yes. I mean, there are questionnaires and there are lots of exercises through the book to help people to start identifying patterns and themes and to start identifying these mindsets that they can change. There's also a free recording on my website, if people go on there onto the media page, that will allow them to go and explore a positive past life. So not necessarily one that needs healing, but one where they had a talent or a skill or something really positive, because we can also remember the good stuff from those lives, and the memory of it kind of re-triggers the resource within us. I'm also just about to release a set of CDs that accompany the book, so then people can go away and listen to and do some of the other in-depth healing works. I'm actually coming to the States. I'm going to be in LA at the end of this month, and I'm doing the Conscious Life Expo in the first weekend of February. So I'll be available there to talk to people, and I'm hoping that I will get some time while I'm there to do some one-on-one sessions with people. But if people really want to explore, I would recommend that they can do all of these explorations and work to clear a certain level of stuff, but that they find a good practitioner to work with if they want to explore the really, really deep stuff. Sometimes sessions can be done even on Skype, some of the lighter stuff. But I know that there's some really good practitioners around that they can work with as well.
So join Lorraine, find out who you were, and get to how you want to be, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Lorraine, what a pleasure to have you here on the program today. This was always a fascinating subject, and it was a good time having you here on the program today.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
And your website one more time.
It's www.innerjourneys, which is JOURNEYS.co.uk.
Very good. Lorraine, thank you again for being on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Be sure to explore those inner journeys by going to innerjourneys.co.uk and find out more about Lorraine's work. We also encourage you to visit us at beyond50radio.com, the number 50, and we do have a weekly e-news update we encourage you to sign up for. We'll also have a hot link there for this interview that you'll be able to enjoy and pass on to others. to find out more about Lorraine's work as well. I'm Daniel Davis. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Thank you again for joining us, and remember, live your day past halfway.